Milling Through History presents The Real Little House on the Prairie. Little House on the Prairie is a book written by Laura Ingalls Wilder that many people have either read or seen the television series of. And yet, what most people might not realize is the stories found within this book and other books written by Wilder are all based on her actual life. So what was it that drove her to go ahead and create these particular novels? Well, she was born February the 7th, 1867, to Charles and Laura Ingalls. As a daughter to a farming family, Laura frequently moved from one place to the next, having gone from Wisconsin to Kansas to Minnesota to Iowa and to the Dakotas. And each of these moves and her experiences living in these different areas helped to serve as the basis of her future works. It was while the family was living in the Dakotas that Laura would first meet Almanzo Wilder, who was a boarder at the Wilder household. And as such, when he became a boarder, their romance began. At the age of 16, Laura would become an elementary school teacher for 3 years, along with also being a high school student and a local dressmaker. She was ever mindful of trying to help her family when it came to bringing in income, and so would oftentimes work very hard to ensure that the family was not struggling with their finances. On August the 25th, 1885, Laura would marry Almanzo Wilder and ended her official working career at that particular point in time. A little over a year later, the couple had their first child, a little girl they named Rose. Life was difficult for the couple as a drought prevented them from being successful in farming while they lived in South Dakota. In 1894, the Wilders would move to Missouri, and they would eventually become successful in farming as they changed the method in which they farmed their land. And instead of relying on a single crop as being their cash crop, they diversified their farm, allowing them to make money in multiple areas and thus ensuring, after a great deal of time, that their financial hold was at least stable. In 1911, Laura took a job as a columnist, writing a column called As a Farm Woman Thinks. This became highly popular throughout the 1910s and into the 1920s, and in the middle of that decade, she would finally bring the column to a close. Between the death of her mother in 1924, her older sister in 1928, and the Great Depression, Laura began to write down her memories of growing up on the prairie as a way of preserving them, and also as a method to help generate more money for her family. Her Little Prairie books were all written specifically for elementary school children, and would become a record of pioneering life in the late 19th century. Her series began with 8 working titles. The first one, Little House in the Big Woods, being published in 1932. In 1933 was the sequel, Farmer Boy. In 1935 was Little House on the Prairie. 1937 saw On the Banks of Plum Creek. 1939 was By the Shores of Silver Lake. 1940 was The Long Winter. 1941, Little Town on the Prairie. And her final book, 1943, These Happy Golden Years. In 1971, an unofficial 9th volume of the series was published called The First 4 Years, after having been discovered after Wilder's death, and it has since been marketed as the 9th volume. Laura and Almanzo would live in Missouri until they both passed away, interestingly enough, 10 years apart from each other. Laura passed away on February the 10th, 1957, at the age of 90, and was buried next to her husband. Their daughter Rose was also buried next to her parents in 1968. All of her titles are now part of the public domain, and in the 1970s, the timeless classic Little House on the Prairie television series was created and would run from 1974 until 1982, and continues to endure as a classic, bringing back the life of Laura Ingalls Wilder for future generations to enjoy. Now be sure to click like, share, and subscribe for future episodes of Milling Through History, and leave your comments below for future episode ideas. And make sure to check out our suggested reading page.